Hey, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm very thrilled to have with me as my guest Brandon Brown, who's a partner at Kirkland Ellis. Brandon, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here with you.
So, Brandon, I invited you to my podcast because I think you have more, shall we say, a more unusual background than most of the lawyers that I interview. So why don't you begin by kind of telling me your background? I understand you came from a pretty small town.
I did. I came from, I think it might be called a village actually still, or even a hamlet. I'm from a town in upstate New York called Boston Lake, which is a very sort of rural, pastoral, very peaceful place to be. Lots of farms and open fields, and great place to be a kid growing up. Um,
What was the population of this place?
Gosh, it was in the thousands, at least when I was there. At least the part of upstate New York that I was in was very very lightly populated.
And what did your parents do to be in that town?
Yeah, funny. My parents are actually from Queens, New York. So this was a big stark change for them. But they had decided they wanted to raise their kid upstate, somewhere more peaceful and safe than New York was at the time in the 70s and 80s. And they were both blue collar though. They were my mom was a secretary and then eventually a teacher's aide at a local elementary school. And my dad worked initially for the utility company. He was a utility worker for Con Ed, Con Edison. It's a New York power company, and then took a bunch of jobs, whatever else he could take. So lawn mowing, plowing snow, a thing that we have to do up in New York that we don't have to do in California. And really anything to kind of make a little bit extra money and make ends meet.
So what was it like for you growing up in this family and in this town?
Well, I thought it was wonderful, to be honest. It's a great place. It was quiet. It was a great place to play and be a kid and be free and be in nature. I don't think I realized until I got a little bit older how tight things were for us, and that there was some financial challenges. My parents had never gone to college, let alone think about going to grad school. We were happy, but it was a little hard growing up with those limited resources.
So how did you get inspired to go to college and law school then? I mean, that was probably, or was that something that your parents always wanted you to do, or how did that come about?
I think the one thing my parents really sort of indoctrinated me was hard work, right? I watched my dad take on as many jobs as he had to sort of take care of the family. And I just always thought that's just what you do, right? You work hard and you maybe still don't make a lot, but you work hard, and that's important. That's what you're supposed to do to provide for your family. College, I don't know that they were pushing me. I think I sort of, as part of that work ethic, realized that was sort of the next place to go. It actually started because I started coding when I was very young
That's interesting.
computers. A friend of mine had a computer, and on the back of 321 Contact magazine, I don't know if you know this magazine for kids, there's code that you could type in. It's called BASIC. It's just a very simple programming language. And I just became enamored with this. I'd always punch in the code, and then I'd start messing with it to see what you could change, and started learning more and more. And this was very young. I was like, it's not a hard language, and so this isn't at all, sort of a prodigy thing. But I was like 10 or 11 doing this, and just like this, I want to do this. This is so much fun. So I did that for a while. I started picking it. Became kind of like I was insatiable. I wanted to learn new languages, and picked up C and some of the more sort of languages that you use these days. And had planned to go to college for that, and actually did start college studying computer science.
Interesting. And so then how did you make the switch to law from that?
Yeah, it was there were a few things that kind of happened. I think the first was, as I was looking at my career trajectory out of college, it wasn't back then, I'm not that old, but back then it wasn't like the Google sort of fun campus life that programmers have. It was sitting in a cubicle, at Microsoft or something. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. I thought maybe I could do more. Maybe there was more that would be more challenging to me. And part of that was because when my father, I think, having watched me grow up being kind of a geek and wanting to sit in front of the computer and learn code, had pushed me when I was very young. I had to start working very young, I think around 15, whenever I could get my working papers in New York. to work in the restaurant business, because he was like, you should do this. You should work in the restaurant business. I think he was very politely indicating that I was being a geek and very introverted, and he wanted me to come out of my shell. And I'm still a geek and I'm still introverted, so that didn't work. But I did learn that I could talk to people, and there was some aspect of talking to strangers and helping them understand a menu or food items or whatnot that was rewarding and challenging at the same time. It was never easy, but I like that. I like that it wasn't easy. I like that it was always something that I had to work hard at. So I was those two things were kind of coming around. And then in college, I started writing my undergraduate thesis on file sharing. This was a thing back then that people were downloading music files, MP3s and all that. And there were a lot of lawsuits, and I was very interested. I was like, there's some tension here between how the technology works and how our laws work. And I started reading some of the cases poorly, I'm sure, because I had no legal education. But I started reading the cases and some of the academic literature, and I couldn't help but think, gosh, I think they need more people who understand the technology in here, because some of these things have repercussions that are hostile to technology, because everybody's trying, but they're not quite getting there. And so those sort of things came together and made me think, I think law school is really the next best path for me.
And how did you like law school when you got there? Was it something you liked instantly, or did it take a little while to get adjusted to? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I always say that engineers have a tough time transitioning to law school, right? It's some of it's the same, right? There's a sort of rote logic to it that I think I did enjoy. I also did my first year of law school at Tulane. I didn't know anything about law school rankings or anything like that, so I took the scholarship and went to Tulane, which meant I was in New Orleans, so that wasn't horrible. New Orleans was a fun place to do my first year of law school. But I did find it challenging. The transition from writing code to writing briefs and papers, while the logic framework made sense to me, the persuasive writing was something that was a little harder to pick up at the time. Yeah. Did
you ever work as a programmer, or did you write what kind of programs did you write when you were in college?
Yeah, so I did actually. I ran. This sounds cooler than it is. I ran a couple software companies that I started selling code that I made. The one that I still have one right now that's running.
Interesting.
Between my first and second year of law school, I was doing basically an unpaid internship. This is part of the reason I decided to transfer out of Tulane, and needed to make money. And I was thinking I could go back to waiting tables at night, but that felt like a step in the wrong direction. And I thought, well, I guess I could sell some of my code, or I could write something. And there was this thing called Second Life that had was popular at that time in 2007. And I'd been eyeing it from an IP perspective. I was curious about it from the merger of technology and IP, because people were making things in there, art and creations, and then selling it. And a question of IP ownership was very interesting. So I was aware of it for that, and I thought, well, people were making a lot of money in there. I guess I'll try that. And so it was a couple weeks before July 4th. So I decided to try my hand at making virtual fireworks in Second Life. I picked up the language, and took me about a week to learn the language, a week to write the fireworks, and started selling them. And I had this very vivid memory of sitting in my apartment in Chicago, having dinner and looking at my email screen open, where every email was a sale of these products in Second Life. And it was scrolling constantly. And it was, for some reason, people were buying these virtual fireworks, and that's real money.
Right.
To US dollars. So it actually put me through law school, selling virtual fireworks.
What's the program that you wrote that's actually still running today? What is that?
It's that.
It's that.
That company is still selling fireworks today. It's not the same as it was 10 years ago, but it's still profitable. And so these days I donate all of it to charity. But
who would you say was like an inspiration for you growing up, in that family to work hard? I mean, you mentioned your parents, but did you have siblings or other people that was sort of a mentor inspiration for you?
I was an only child, which I imagine after a few more minutes you'll probably be able to tell, I'm told. But my parent, I'd be remiss if I didn't answer that as my parents first. The hard work and the ethic that they had was huge. It just every step of the way was important. Even though they didn't know I should be going to college or know I should be going to law school, just seeing them and their grit was really valuable. And then along the way, I had a number of really inspirational sort of managers or bosses, both in restaurants. I worked for a lawyer in college to get a sense of it, who really took me under his wing and gave me a sense of what litigation looked like. And I really tried my best to accumulate mentors along the way, and still keep in touch with a lot of them. It's those. I think people don't realize how a little bit of work can really impact a youth and stick with.
Yeah, interesting. One of my guests on my podcast was Steve Bachner, who's a very well-known partner at Wilson Sonsini, and he worked as a waiter, and he said there's no question that being a waiter was the single most valuable thing in learning how to be a service provider in the law firm, because, not only do you have to provide service, but you have to manage up and manage down. And, he said it was just so invaluable being a waiter. So
I completely agree. I'd probably go a step further and say that, my first waitstaff job was at a Cracker Barrel, which is, Cracker Barrel. And talking to a Cracker Barrel table is, to me, the best training for being a trial lawyer.
Yeah.
Because, you sort of, if you can help them understand what's going on and figure out what their needs are, it's the same as talking to your jury. And it teaches you to not talk down to people who aren't understanding you, and really just help them, guide them to where they're trying to go. I think that was the single most formative experience for me.
What about giving credit to the kid who had the computer? He sounds important.
You're right. I should probably call out Brian a little bit more. I'll have to call him.
He sounds important. I don't know. He sounds important, actually.
That's a good point. I'll call after this. I will send him a message.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of computer were you programming on?
So back then it would have been like, I don't remember what he had. My dad was able to get a computer from work that was one of those like old towers, a 386 or 286 tower.
Oh, okay.
That was huge, the size of a giant desk. But yeah, it was old school computers.
Yeah, interesting. So now tell me how. So then obviously you obviously went into IP law, so that was a natural fit with your kind of technical background. Tell me a little bit how your practice has slowly evolved and how that's evolved to today.
Yeah. So I think the biggest transition was I transferred from Tulane to Berkeley, and suddenly, and unfairly, I think it's a issue that I have as a hiring partner at Kirkland, is unfairly. There was no reason I couldn't get hired at Tulane except it wasn't Berkeley. And as soon as I got to Berkeley, the law firms were very excited to see a guy with straight A's and a computer science degree.
Yeah.
And so I got to learn a lot about the profession very quickly. And what sort of met my goals was looking for somewhere like where I've been my entire career at Kirkland, was I want to get in, I want to get going, right? Just like why I didn't want to be a programmer. I don't want to sit in a cubicle at Kirkland or at a law firm and just churn papers. And so I was very aggressive about figuring out, where are people getting good opportunities? Where am I going to get to trial the fastest? And where am I going to have mentors that are going to take care of me and create those opportunities for me? And it became apparent very quickly that Kirkland was one of the few that was going to offer me that opportunity. So I've been here my entire career. I think I started off doing almost entirely patent litigation, as a lot of IP litigators I think did, and some phenomenal mentors here at the firm. Including the heads of our group and the heads of my office in San Francisco, have really created opportunities for me to shine, to go to trial, to take witnesses in jury trials as a junior associate, and then all the way up to sort of being a first chair trial lawyer for my own clients now. But it's sort of gone from patent litigation to being a bit more of a generalist in IP litigation. I think trade secret law has become a big part of my practice. I had a recent win for Motorola against Hytera, where Hytera stole all of Motorola source code, and the jury found for Motorola for about $750 million. And I think we see that transition in the industry as the federal trade secret law has kind of encouraged us to enter that practice a little bit more. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask you, give me a feel for the kind of range of technologies you've worked on. I'm always curious, having been a former IP lawyer myself. I'm always curious what kind of, tell me some of the kinds of technologies you've worked on.
Yeah, I would have thought I'd just be doing computer science stuff. But very quickly you learn that, like, what you actually need is not a specific technical background. You just need the willingness to learn technology. That's what a mindset. So I've done cases all the way from very tough computer science stuff to semiconductor manufacturing and how they sort of print memory and transistors onto tiny wafers, to power systems stuff. So the same stuff my dad grew up working on in Con Ed. I've litigated cases for companies like ABB on that. And I have a case right now for John Deere on seeding technology, on how to plant seeds in the ground at high precision. So a huge range. That's probably one of the best parts about being an IP litigator for me, is I get to be a geek about half the time still, and geek out about the technology and have access to all these resources to learn about it. And then half the time I get to litigate and explain these things to the jury and to the judge.
It is kind of the best of both worlds, especially when you work with experts. I mean, right, those are people that are like, they live and breathe the science, so you can geek out with them all day long and, and not feel bad about, doing it, because that's part of your job. What's the most complex technology you've kind of had to grapple with as a lawyer, would you say?
I think, despite my computer science degree, I think some of the major processor companies do in the processors to make them faster is, I think, to this day still insane. It takes a lot of work to try to get your head around exactly how they're optimizing everything in a way that allows us to have a faster computer every year. I find that very, it's challenging, it's complicated. I really enjoy it. I think the other thing that still blows my mind, though, is I hinted at it earlier, the semiconductor manufacturing. I mean, we're printing transistors the size of 1/100th of your human hair.
Yeah.
You're putting millions and millions of them, and that's your memory stick, right? And I think that we as humans have managed to master that, I think is amazingly humbling.
Do you think your clients appreciate it? Do they often know that you have a science background? Does that ever come up in conversation, like, oh, wow, you seem to be asking more questions than the average lawyer, or that kind of thing?
I would hope so. I'd hope it's a hiring point. It's certainly an advantage when I get into trial.
Yeah.
Right? So when a computer science professor in particular wants to, when I'm cross-examining somebody like that, and they want to kind of take you for a ride and technobabble, I can cut right through it, and then still boil it down for the jury. So I hope that my clients are seeing that and are valuing it, for sure.
Well, it's kind of like the difference between, knowing what a compiler does and having written one, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you also take any double E classes when you were in college, or are you strictly computer science?
I did. I dabbled a little bit in double E. You sort of do, I think, as a computer science major, you pick it up. I actually do a little bit more of that now in my spare time.
Really?
I like to sort of, when in the limited time I have, if I go down into the garage to the workbench, I dabble around with robotics and typically now building toys. That automated toys for my cat is a big big hobby that is annoying him and my wife to no end, but it's fun.
Can you still solve a differential equation? That's always
It's been a while. I want to say maybe and hope that you're not going to show me one.
Well, Brandon, this has been a wonderful conversation. This is not the kind of conversation I have with most lawyers, but having been a double E and having gone to Caltech myself, I do enjoy this. And I didn't want to turn it into a science and math conversation, but I really did enjoy it. It was great hearing your story.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for creating the opportunity for me to tell it.
This is Richard Hsu and Brandon Brown. Thanks.